Our world is marred by turmoil and suffering. The people are in pain, and the world seems to be burning down around us. But despite it all, I still hold on. This darkness around me is suffocating, but at long last I see a light at the end of the tunnel. If you've ever been active in the indie games / newgrounds scene, then more than likely you are aware of Edmund McMillen. Most will likely know him from what could be considered the greatest roguelike of all time, The Binding of Isaac, but Ed has been around much longer than that, and in fact was one of the main driving forces in the indie revolution that inspired gaming way back in the late 2000s. Edmund and his work has inspired numerous amounts of game devs, artists, and other creatives throughout the years, and I personally hold a lot of respect for the guy and what he has been able to achieve. With the release of Mugenics on the horizon, and since I really don't have anything better to be doing, I decided to take a look at Edmund's past work and talk about it. Before Isaac, before Meat Boy, and before he even made games, Edmund used to run a website called This Is a Cry for Help, where he would host his comics, funny images, and the dark, edgy humor teens back in the 90s and early 2000s thought was funny. Now the site is long dead, but if we plug into the internet's handy-dandy time machine, we can see a facsimile of what the website was like back in its heyday. From what I could see, most of the links were dead, and if they weren't, I was a little too scared to click on them lest I got some prehistoric internet virus. But I did make sure to check out his hate mail section. I suggest that you make your site kid-proof. I do not appreciate finding this on my stepson's system. I am white and have nothing against non-whites. Shortly after creating the website, Edmund would start posting some of his animations and interactive flashes he would make to newgrounds.com. The backup files, the hermit, 6 uses for a dead baby dress up, etc. These are technically Edmund's first games. Just like how Gone Home is technically a game. But it wouldn't be until 2003 when Edmund would collab with another developer to produce a game with a little more substance beyond just clicking and reading. Carious Weltling is not a very good game. It's just Missile Command, but instead takes place in Edmund's original world that pretty much all of his early games would take place in, the Badlands. The Badlands was originally a short-lived comic Edmund would post on another website, and was a sadistic world full of sadistic creatures who lived and died by nature's cruel rules. Most of these Badlands games are pretty bad, but since they were made with Adobe Flash, it's kind of hard to tell if they were always bad. They are all kind of basic, but with some of them, especially Tri-Arachnid, have fun ideas and cool gimmicks, and Edmund's fantastic, distinctive art style to prop them up. However, since Adobe Flash sunsetted, most Flash games tend to have a lot more jank and glitches associated with them, since they need to be ran through shoddy emulation. The majority of these early ones were extremely simple though, and not very well thought out. You mostly just click buttons and attain high scores, or they were somewhat half-baked with more experimental titles like Host, Gish, and Tri-Arachnid. In 2008 though, Edmund and the few other developers he worked with would really start to develop their own style. This is clearly when Edmund's game dev career really started to pop off. While Edmund had more minor successes with Gish and a few of his other projects, 2008 saw the original release of Meat Boy. Meat Boy if you couldn't guess, was the original concept that would become the basis for Super Meat Boy, which would release 2 years later. Meat Boy was an instant success, as this game alone is what caught the attention of several big gaming companies, most notably Nintendo and Microsoft. Nintendo originally approached McMillen and Refrenis and asked if they would be interested in producing a game for the Wii's own line of downloadable titles called WiiWare. Of course, at that time, when Nintendo offers you to make a game for them, the correct answer is to just go, yeah. While Ed was more interested in making a sequel to Aether or Gish, I understand why these companies were more interested in seeing an expanded version of Meat Boy. Edmund had said that he was inspired by games like Ghosts and Goblins, Mega Man, and the Japanese Super Mario 2. And if you have played these games, then you can clearly see the inspiration they have on Meat Boy. Meat Boy is a very faithful modern revival of that brutal NES classic. So it's obvious that, given the time period, they would be more interested in seeing a Meat Boy game, as it was significantly less experimental and generally the safer option when compared to Aether and Gish, given the fact that they were kind of jerking off old NES titles at the time. Production began on Super Meat Boy in 2009, but quickly the scope of the game began to grow far past its original plan and premise. The game grew so large eventually that it eclipsed the size requirements for it to be a WiiWare game, and with Nintendo uninterested in releasing it as a full disc due to it being near the end of the Wii's life cycle, that meant the game would only be released on Xbox 360 and Steam, initially. Edmund and Refrenis worked tirelessly to complete Super Meat Boy in time for the 2010 Xbox Game Feast, which was an event they were holding to celebrate and showcase many smaller AA as well as a few indie game titles that could be bought and played on the Xbox Arcade at the time. Team Meat described the final 2 months as hell, working sunup to sundown 7 days a week, sleeping 4 to 5 hours a night, and frequently skipping meals to reach deadlines, which makes it kinda sad because it wasn't even worth it in the end. Super Meat Boy was hardly marketed for the event, as Microsoft had decided to pull a Cats Don't Dance on the game and give up on it before it even released. Edmund had stated that despite Super Meat Boy selling much better than many of its peers in the event, Meat Boy was hardly advertised, which honestly, I'm inclined to believe him. If you take a look at the Steam versus Xbox Arcade sales, you can see a huge disparity, despite the fact that most people were still console gaming during this time, as well as the fact that Microsoft is well known for pulling tons of scummy tactics and moves like this, and this was at its worst during the 360 era. Despite that though, Super Meat Boy was a rousing success, and once again proving that, just like other indie hits like Braid and Cave Story, that there was a certain quality and uniqueness a small team of creators could bring to a gaming market in desperate need of life, without the need for a $1 million budget. Super Meat Boy was my introduction into Edmund's work, even if I didn't know his name yet. I saw loads of YouTubers talking about this crazy difficult platformer on the Xbox Arcade, and then when I finally got to try it for myself, I instantly dropped it because I was immediately confronted with the Dark World levels, and I thought they were too hard. It wasn't actually until years later, after I had played Isaac for several hundred hours, that I finally decided to go back and see if I was being a big dumb baby about its difficulty. And wouldn't you know it, I was. Since at that point, I had already completed Celeste and its B-sides, Hollow Knight's Path of Pain, and a good portion of Crash 1's time trial levels. So I was a lot more accustomed to the uber-hard platformer. But I think this game was somewhat instrumental in giving us a new age in gaming. For many years up to the point Super Meat Boy released, games were slowly getting more and more dumbed down, as the to try and appeal to a wider audience. Most you saw for hard games was ridiculous rhythm games, overtuned difficulty settings that were hardly balanced, and the unfair platformer, like Cat Mario or I Wanna Be the Guy. Around the start of the 2010s though, we started to see the release of games that were unapologetically challenging. Games like Meat Boy and Dark Souls, that showed that there was still a lot of interest in games that were challenging yet fair. Games that didn't necessarily have any reward beyond just surmounting their challenge. This trend certainly didn't begin with Meat Boy, but many other games would draw inspiration from the example that this game set, along with others releasing at the time. Did you know? After the release of Super Meat Boy, Edmund was actually planning to begin development on his next idea, eugenics. But Refrenis, the other member of Team Meat, wanted to take some time off after the stressful development cycle of Super Meat Boy. Understandable, and Edmund was okay with putting the development of eugenics on hold and decided to take a risk and work with Florian Himsel to work on some other experimental ideas of his. Following a 2-week game jam, Isaac was born. A Zelda-inspired roguelike centered around the fractured psyche of a child from an abused home. Edmund drew a lot of inspiration from his early work when it came to Isaac. In fact, a lot of the enemies in Isaac are references to his Badlands series of comics that I talked about approximately 2 pages ago. The story of Isaac also calls back to Edmund's past work, and takes a lot of inspiration from his real-world experiences. The story, from the start, was heavily centered around Isaac and his born-again Christian mother, and Isaac's dark fantasies of defeating the monster his mother has become due to the delusions she has succumbed to. His imaginative world starts out harmless enough, where he is defeating giant piles of poop and flies, but eventually grows darker as he descends deeper into these rotten fantasies. Meanwhile, glimpses of his real life shine through in some of the items. Dog food for dinner, unmarked pills filling his mother's coin purse, and Guppy's head represents, well, you get the point. The real story of Isaac is pretty much as dark and dreary as his imaginative one. And honestly, I think it was pretty ballsy for Edmund to put all this dark subject matter in the game, especially since it involves a kid. Edmund has said that he was well aware that the release of this game could be career suicide, but that he felt it was important to not compromise his vision and story. I respect that position a lot, as even today, Isaac feels very unique due to its darkly realistic subject matter. Isaac was the very first Edmund McMillen game that I was interested in. As a teen, I was a big fan of stuff like Felix Colgrave's animations, Jack Stauber, Fallout, the movie 9, that type of shit. And I was also interested in theological studies and spent a lot of time researching various religions. I was initially interested in Isaac due to its grotesque and unique art style, but then I was drawn in further by its supremely engaging gameplay. Isaac hit almost everything that I wanted to see in a game at the time. Well, eventually I got bored, because admittedly I was pretty bad at the game. The original Isaac didn't really sell that well, but would get new life due to the growing Let's Play culture that was prevalent on YouTube at the time. This led Edmund to eventually make the Wrath of Lamb DLC, and later a remake called The Binding of Isaac Rebirth. Rebirth is kind of where the game really began to explode in popularity, as it was an extremely easy game to make a Let's Play on. Rebirth is also where I really got into the game. Its controls were much more refined, and the items felt more impactful than they did in Flash Isaac. And honestly, I just couldn't get enough of this game. I played it on Xbox initially, but would eventually move over to PC to start using mods. But across all platforms, I'd say I've probably played around 1,300 hours. Isaac's infinite replayability and continued support through mods and DLC has allowed it to survive much longer than really any other roguelike. While it may not have been groundbreaking when it came out, its near flawless execution of its gameplay and its fantastic use of its narrative to drive your runs has allowed Isaac to define the genre. While some games may have sharper gameplay or better narratives or superior replayability, a lot of this started with Isaac. The fanbase for Isaac exploded as Edmund and Nicholas continued to work diligently on it. Eventually, there were multiple DLCs and various forms of merch, and even a prequel and a card game in the works, as Isaac quickly became Edmund's flagship. However, this began to cause problems for Edmund, as he began to feel like he had pigeonholed himself as the Isaac guy. This, along with some other issues in his life at the time, like lawsuits against Nicholas, the company helping develop Isaac, developing agoraphobia, and his wife's pregnancy, had him questioning whether or not he was even interested in game development anymore. Edmund considers this to be the darkest moment of his career, but eventually concluded that he would have to work through this his own way. Of course, his own way meant that he got to work on another game. The chef was destined to cook, after all, right? From this dreary state of mind was born The End Is Nigh, a spiritual successor of sorts to Meat Boy. The platform is somewhat similar, yet it feels more grounded. Meat Boy was a boy without skin, and it felt like he was slipping and sliding all over the place as you often raced against the levels. Ash, in comparison, feels much slower and more grounded when compared to the fast-paced action of Meat Boy. Initially, this makes the levels seem a little easier in my opinion, but as time goes on, you realize how methodical and precise your approach must be while traversing these stages. On top of that, there are significantly more platforming mechanics you will have to juggle as you continue throughout the game, adding a bit of a puzzle element to each stage, which honestly makes this game feel more like Celeste than it does Super Meat Boy, despite coming out a whole year earlier. While I do think that Celeste is a better game, I can't deny the quality of this game's level design and structure. With Super Meat Boy, you have this sort of classic save the princess, save the day type of narrative. But The End Is Nigh is a lot more nihilistic. You play as Ash, this weird blob man, as he grapples with the fact that the world has ended, and due to this loneliness and desperation he feels, decides to leave and brave the ruined world to see if there's any hope of finding a friend. Right away, you'll start finding these blobby fellows, but as soon as you collect one, you find out that these aren't people like you, but instead, they are tumors. Your real goal is to collect the body parts of a dead man to make a friend. Ash is needy and desperate, but relatable at the same time. His world is on fire, and with nothing else left to lose, he decides to take a chance on something new. And ultimately, he fails. I think that almost anybody can sympathize with this. Life is hard, and you can just give it your all only for it to blow up in the end. But while it may seem crippling at the time, eventually you'll just have to accept what's happened and move on. This game isn't about some great triumph or feat, nor do you save a princess or stop a villain from destroying the world. The world is already gone, and you're just trying to make the best of your bad situation. So it's fitting that at the end, despite all the hardship Ash goes through, and in his very last moments of life before the world blows up again, Ash would feel happy. They say it's about the journey, not the destination. But personally, I believe the journey makes the destination. All the hardship, triumphs, and joy will often come from the betterment and joy of mastering the skill or overcoming the challenges. Your experience, your memories, and purpose are defined by the journey. In the end, all that matters is just to try. To keep your spirit and determination to the end, even if you do fail. Because, after all, the only thing you can ask of someone is to try. Edmund clearly put a lot of heart and soul into the production of The End Is Nigh. And it is surprising to me that despite such a dreary concept, the game is strangely uplifting. At least through my interpretation of it. The End Is Nigh reignited Edmund's love for game development. And with how personal the project was, it makes sense why he considers it to be the best game he has ever made. I, personally, am thankful he found that spark again, because this would mean that we would begin to see a bit of a renaissance with Edmund's work. The Isaac card game came out, and it was actually pretty fun. Isaac would get a prequel game, and we would receive the very last DLC for Isaac, that finally ties up the loose ends and concludes the story. Most importantly though, we got confirmation that Mugenics was in fact a real game, that is coming out next year. I was extremely stoked to hear about this, as I've been waiting over a decade to play this game. Originally reading about it back in 2014 in the Game Informer magazine, if you remember that. The game looks great too. It looks like they switched gears from a Pokemon-inspired monster battling RPG to a tactical RPG. But instead of using anime waifus and husbands like the Fire Emblem games, you instead use inbred cats with autism. Edmund's style and games have always been an inspiration to me. I have always enjoyed the raw, grotesque beauty of his games and artwork, even if half the time they amount to a fart joke of some kind. The creative journey this man has undergone has always filled me with determination that one day, my own creative pursuits will be realized. That I continue to develop my own style and can continue to improve the skills that bring me joy in life, even if I never succeed from using them. Hard times will come and go, but I believe that eventually, everybody can find their own path. Thanks for watching.